Stanley Kramer, what is cinema?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm sure it's not all cinema verite, if that's what you mean. I think that it's probably the greatest luxury ever expended upon theoretically creative people. Sometimes they're not so creative. We are not so creative. But I think that it's an expression which best blends almost every means of communication: music, the spoken word, photography, lighting, impacts, everything, in which one can communicate with another person, with other people, and I think that that's a tremendous luxury.
Welcome to Talking Film, a series of half-hour programs which explore motion pictures entirely through the words of the people who make them. When directing is discussed or written about, you mostly hear views and opinions on the art of cinema, the role of the director in bringing together the various aesthetic elements. This program, however, is devoted to the business of directing motion pictures, the blending of all of the logistical, the physical, the commercial elements of film production with the creative aspects. All of the directors who appear in this program are among the most successful ever produced by the industry. Stanley Kramer, who created On the Beach and The Defiant Ones. Robert Aldrich, director of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Ted Kotcheff, director of Someone is Killing, the great chefs of Europe. Richard Brooks, writer, director, creator of Lord Jim and Looking for Mr. Goodbar, among many others. We begin now by asking Stanley Kramer what his criteria are for a good film.
It's a feel. There are no criteria in regard to a feeling. If you could set down a set of rules, probably that's what everybody would be doing all the time. They try to do that in cycles. When you have a successful film, you'll usually find there are 15 to follow in the same genre. They don't usually work as well, because by the time you get through doing what you think are the criteria for a successful film, or even what people want to see, it's no longer the criteria, nor do they any longer want to see it by the time you get around to making it the second time around. I think it's just an instinct, something sometimes which is fresh, something sometimes which is provocative, but certainly that mysterious chemistry has to be present. You look for a story and you say, this is a wonderful story, I can make a wonderful film of it. A great many amateurs come together and say, we're going to do this, and for some reason, without any previous experience, you look at it and you say, really a work of some mark and attainment. And then professionals who've done beautiful work in the past have got a wonderful track record come together, and they end up with a crock of cottage cheese, so that chemistry's got something to do with it, that almost indefinable something for the criteria. I don't know what it is.
What are you trying, let me put it this way, what are you trying to achieve in your films?
Well, it's a terribly dastardly answer. Questions as far-reaching of this, and to be able to ad-lib answers sometimes can get you into difficulty. Yeah. I'm trying to please myself. I don't ever expect to. I really don't ever expect to, and I never have. I work on the theory that unless what pleases me will soon thereafter please a great many other people, that would have to serve as what I'm trying to do. If I don't succeed, I think I may have to steal quietly away into the night and never be heard from again. But I am trying to please myself. There is no such thing. As soon as I do, or worse, think I do, then I am fini. It is the end.
Robert Aldrich, how did you get into motion pictures?
Well, there used to be a thing, a job called production clerk. They don't have them anymore. They've been organized out, unfortunately. Who made out the call sheet, made out the production report, kept the time cards on the actors, and was the general gopher. And they were the lowest form of human life. You could pay $25 a week, and you were a gopher. But it also gave you opportunity to be on the set and to watch and listen. And I came here in July of '41, and the Screen Directors Guild, it was now called Directors Guild of America, it was then called Screen Directors Guild, organized those production clerks into second, third, fourth, fifth assistants in October of that year. And you were very fortunate because they gave you a chain of opportunity that had always been cut off. A guy could be a gopher forever and not be able to get into that union, into that guild. But unfortunately, that October of '41, they were organized. So you had a golden opportunity if you worked hard to advance. The American dream still worked.
So that's how you get started?
Yeah.
Whom did you get started with? Who were some of the...
RKO.
And what were some of the early people?
First picture, the first picture with people like Dave Butler and Stevenson. I did the first picture. Michelle Morgan and Connery did in this picture, in this country. But that was very early.
Anything to do with Wells in his
No,
years?
I worked a couple of days on Wells' Journey into Fear.
Journey into Fear. Yeah.
But once I became a first, which took about 5 years, then I worked with some marvelous directors. I worked with Milestone and Chaplin and Renoir. And
Well, yes, you were
Losey,
associate director at Limelight.
No, I didn't direct. He was
Associate?
the director, I was assistant director.
Assistant.
I really worked with some terribly talented people. Very, very lucky, because it is luck. You get those assignments and those really extraordinary men, and you learn.
In the blossoming of your life, you worked usually away from the major studios independently, didn't you? With your own outfit?
It seems to be.
Could you talk about being the independent producer?
Well, I'd been after an assistant director, I became a production manager because production managers make more money. And wanting to be a director, and it's the toughest thing in the world. You're a director when somebody wakes up in the morning, touches you on the shoulder and says you're a director. It's like being knighted. How much different were you the day before, you know? But, and I got sent to New York to direct some soap operas. And they turned out reasonably well, and I stayed there for a couple of years, and then came back to this town and finally got a job directing small features. And the first one I did for Metro, and then all the rest of them for a long, long time were from independents. And I was very fortunate. Some of them turned out, the early ones turned out rather well. And they were successful, which allowed us to set up our own company in '53. And
this is Robert Aldrich Productions?
No, it was originally called Associates in Aldrich, and then it was called the Aldrich Studio, and now it's called the Aldrich Company. But that started with the first picture we made under that is Kiss Me Deadly. We made that was late '53.
What was your most successful under that? Big Dirty Dozen?
I would think either Dirty Dozen or Longest Yard. Longest Yard was really a Al Ruddy picture for Paramount, but it was a co-production with the Aldrich Company. They lent my services out for that picture.
Where would you go and shoot them? I mean, you wouldn't actually have your own while you're a company. You use other studio areas, don't you?
We did until we had that period. We had our own studio, but you'd shoot, as we mentioned, Sodom and Gomorrah was made in Morocco. Too Late the Hero was made in the Philippines. I made Angry Hills in Greece. I made a couple of pictures in England. In France. You know the one. Extraordinary reward in this business is that you practice your craft throughout the world, and you sometimes isn't as pleasant as you'd like it to be, but
how might you go to MGM or to
yeah, I've gone back to MGM.
Yeah.
I've gone back to Paramount. I used to work there as an assistant. I've gone back and made pictures there.
Didn't you do an early picture for Burt Lancaster's company?
Oh, sure, I did too. I did a picture called Apache, which was I like to think of as the first picture that took the Indians' point of view, but it was too early. Nobody really cared about Indians in 1952, you know. Then we made a picture in Mexico that was terribly successful with Gary Cooper called Veracruz.
Veracruz, that was beautiful.
With Burt, and that was very successful.
What was he? How was he to work with Lancaster himself?
Very tough then. Nobody knows this, but we remade Apache about 4 years ago at Universal, and we called it Ozana's Raid. And what really happened, Burt played the Indian scout as opposed to playing the Indian 20 years ago.
Oh, that's right.
20 years before he played the Indian. Yeah. And it was still the comment on the unfair treatment of the American Indian. But by then it was in vogue, you know. But
back then, was he a pretty...
I must remember, it was his own company.
Yeah, that's...
And he was a very man filled with energy and filled with ambition. And very, very bright. But it made life of a director pretty tough. I've worked with him 2 or 3 times in more recent years, and he's a delight. I guess a delight compared to what he was 25 years ago. We went to Germany to make Twilight. And he was just marvelous, very helpful, very cooperative, and I don't think we've gotten the picture made without him. He's easy to work with now, tough to work with then. I guess we're all getting older.
Yeah. Stanley Kramer, what does a film director do?
Well, he's taken over the main procedure and main function of what was once called a producer's medium, the days of Selznick and Thalberg and Goldwyn. Today they call it a director's medium, which I don't believe at all. But he's taken over that function of having the dream. The dream is usually the director's dream. Sometimes it's a writer's dream, and then sometimes in conjunction, the two of them together have the dream. But it is a dream of visualizing something that they want to do very badly in advance and bringing it to fruition. Now, the director now, in contrast to other days, usually selects the piece of material or shares in the writing of it, works with the writer right down the line, certainly does the major part of the casting, supervises the editing, certainly does the shooting, obviously, on the set, laying out the picture with the production designer and directing the people, and edits it absolutely frame for frame, and usually is on the road trying to sell it when he's finished. It's a pretty all-around job.
As a producer, what does the producer do for our viewers?
The producer's main contribution, and I'm going to lose a lot of friends by saying this, the producer's main contribution is to find the money. If he can find the money, he's really fulfilled his function. If you can find the money and keep everybody off your back while you go make the movie, that's a tremendous accomplishment, and not many people can do that.
The director, what does the director do?
While you're talking to a very prejudiced subject, the director makes the movie. Usually he finds the material, always he casts the picture, and he has to make it in terms of manufacturing it, day by day, frame by frame. He cuts it, he previews it, he recuts it, he re-previews it, and he gives it back to the producer and say, now you said it was going to be a hit, go make it a hit.
Is the director the author? Do you believe in the auteur
theory? No, I
theory?
don't believe in the auteur theory. I'm very much against the auteur theory. The reason being that I've been around quite a while, and my feeling is that this is a conjunctive art form. It's an art form in which one man's thumbprint, probably the director's, is most strongly upon it. But then, that being the case, since the director is the boss, he brings in for his baby, to nurture and bring his baby into creation, the finest composer as an artist, the finest actors, the best writers, certainly the best musicians of all kinds, photographers, and they have to have range to do their creative thing. You can't do that when the auteur theory is operative. These people have got to have range, and the trouble with it is the frustration for the director, if he be the so-called, quote, boss, unquote, is that it may be better than the way he dreamed it, or it may be worse. It's never exact. There are always 4 violins too many in the finished product, or there's not enough distortion in that scene photographically, or an actor said, I can't read that damn line, it's impossible, so you got to change it, and that's one of your favorite lines. But the give and take is necessary. That's the function of the director. It's patience, understanding, and creating an atmosphere for artists to give and produce.
There was a time when you were very caught up in this whole issue of who is the real author of a film, the writer and the director, and I think you had to make a great number of statements at that time. I was just going to say how you feel all about that now, and you partially answered that, and also the auteur theory. I wanted to throw that at you.
Well, you know, it's a very, very complicated question, not only for your viewers, but for people in the industry. And obviously, we've done a great deal of research for the Guild and ones. And I do think, without getting into the nuances of what the auteur theory is as opposed to, I do think the director makes the movie. And I do think that if the movie falls on its face, the director's going to get blamed, and I think he should get blamed. If it's successful, there's going to be a lot of guys crowding in to share that success, and I don't really say that is wrong. The writer's certainly entitled, the producer's entitled, the actor's entitled. When a picture fails, though, the actor will go get a job the next day, the writer will get a job the next day, the director will suffer. And I think that that is the practical, pragmatic endorsement of who's responsible for the picture. You don't see actors staying out of work for 3 years because a picture flops, or you don't see a writer staying out. Now, you know, The psychological, philosophical nuances of the auteur theory are terribly complicated. Not very profound, but complicated. But I think in the main, if you can take who pays for bad pictures to direct, I think the inversion of that really is the answer to the problem.
Ted Konchev, in your eyes, is the director, the author. I want to know your views on the auteur theory here.
Well, I think if a director writes and directs his own films, I think then he's obviously the complete auteur of the film. Yeah. But I think the auteur theory has been taken far too seriously and gone to extremes, in a sense that I think there's always a collaboration between a writer and a director on a film. I think a writer makes a very, very important contribution. And then there's also many contributions made by other people, by editors and by costume people. I mean, it's a communal activity. The director is the captain of the ship, but a lot of other people are involved in running that ship. But ultimately, the director makes the final decision. He says, I will accept that idea, even if it comes from someone else, or I'll not accept it. And so ultimately, you're the one who is responsible for it.
Because you bring it all together, don't you? Every
Yes.
single aspect
Everything,
of it.
aspect of it. That is your responsibility and your decision.
Your producer is Robert Aldrich's son. Is that
That's right.
correct? Because we
William
met him.
Aldrich.
Yes, we met him the other day, and he said it was his son's solo effort, first time.
That's right.
What is the relationship between you and the producer then, Ted?
Well, I think I like having a producer in the film because when you're on first of all, on your battlefront, you need someone to be working behind you all the time or ahead of you. And also, I often have, for a scene, I may have many ideas, and I like to use a producer as a kind of sounding board and say, what do you think of this? Sometimes even when you articulate an idea to a producer, you know it's no good. So it needs a kind of a sympathetic rapprochement between two people. And I find it very useful to have someone to say, bounce my ideas off.
How do you select a project? What turns you on?
Well, I suspect it's different things for different people. I've always tried to stay as close as I can to the Polanski theory. I think that the man's struggle for self-esteem is more easy to dramatize. By man's, I mean it can be ladies as well. But the struggle for self-esteem, once you've fallen from grace in your own opinion, I think around that concept can be built the most interesting pictures. I think that it's not that I have to prevail over you, that I have to prevail over myself is the most interesting material. It doesn't always prove to be true, but that's what I look for.
How did the idea of making a movie out of Looking for Mr. Goodbar, the conceptual aspect, how did that come about?
Well, I became acquainted with a fellow who was just moving out of the agency business into the movie business. And he asked me to read a copy of the book because a few directors had been approached, and writers. One of the reasons, I guess, the studio wanted to make it is because it was a bestseller. And if it's a bestseller, maybe it ought to be a best movie. I mean, to make a lot of money or something. As long as it has to do with people going to bed, why, there's a good chance of that kind of thing. So 4 or 5, or I don't know how many other directors had been approached, and some had said yes and then pulled out, and some said no to begin with. And he wanted to know, why is it that a bestseller of this kind would be turned down? So I read the book as a favor to him, met with him, and discussed with him what I thought some of the problems were. Most of them were structural. It was a difficult book to make into a movie from a structural point of view. And I thought also that the book might be ripped off by Paramount's own television department before they ever got started with that, let alone any other studio. They all were reading the book, and whoever read the book, they say, well, you know, either movie companies or others are not delicate about matters of just borrowing material wherever they can borrow it. And I said, so by the time you came out with this, it would be old hat. He said, thank you very much. He came back about 5 weeks later and says, hey, would you like to do it yourself? I said, oh, I'd have to think about that. I'd been wanting to do a story about a contemporary girl, and I thought, well, maybe this might work. I talked with the producer, Mr. Fields, and with Mr. Diller, who was just coming into the studio around that time, and said that I might take a shot at this if the picture didn't cost more than the minimum amount of money to make it. Because I felt the subject was a little dicey. They said, what are you talking about when you talk about a minimum amount of money? I said, well, I don't think you can make a picture of this kind in under 70 or 80 days or 90 days because you're dealing with what I would consider to be some very delicate matters. I've never made a porno movie. I wouldn't mind dealing with a sexual or erotic in a movie. The other, even that is very delicate. How do you go about doing that? You just don't throw a bank of lights on somebody and say, go to it. You've got actors and actresses who may be sensitive. I don't know who they're going to be. So if you're going to shoot for 70 or 80 days, it's going to cost you about $2.5 million. I based that figure on what it had cost me to do in cold blood, which worked 78 days or something.
I see.
They said, well, how can you do that then? Well, I said, that means that I can't be paid, the producer can't be paid, and all the money has to go on the screen. It also means that you can't have anything to do with the casting, have a final cut, or anything else, because if I'm going to invest a couple of years in making a movie, then you can't screw around with it. Miss Keaton is by nature a very shy girl, extremely shy, and like most of us in real life, has concerns about how she looks and whether she's acceptable and whether she's, not that she is a forlorn lady, she's inside she's made of stainless steel, this girl, but she is an inordinately shy girl. Well, most women think, well, my bosom is not big enough, or my thighs are too thin, or something is, because the ads, and that's what part of the picture is about, what advertisements and magazines and television all do to try to create an image about what you ought to look like, how white your teeth ought to be, and if you drive a certain kind of car, volare, you'll get all the broads. And somehow the beautiful blonde will come with a Cadillac or some other kind of car or a Ford, I don't know what. And if you have a certain perfume, 14 men will faint as you walk by, and so on and so on and so on. And so she brought up the same way, has this problem in the movie as well. She's going to have to play some erotic, sensual scenes. And I didn't want to shoot a porno movie. How do you photograph this? Yeah. And how do you get to such an idea as to make an audience, if there will be an audience, sit in that theater and as though they were looking out of their room across the street in one lighted window and something was happening there. So it was very personal and private. And what do you actually see when you yourself are about to have the peak of your love relationship with a man or a woman or a beast or whatever is your preference? What do you really see? How much of the man does the woman actually see? All of him? A cheekbone? Part of his nose? His lips? Part of his arm? With a woman, do you see the entire woman? Is it even the woman that you're with? Or is it some other woman you're thinking of? Are your eyes open or closed? Is the sexual aspect of it tactile? Is it in your mind? How much of it is exciting because of what you yourself feel? Is it really a selfish, personal feeling? Or are you a voyeur who's trying to please the partner? So these are subjects that we discussed. And I had to tell the cameraman that the idea was not, what is the source of light? I said, the hell with the source of light. Let's give the illusion here of what it is that we want to really show. And what we want to show is less, not more. And yet the audience should know what's happening. And there should be a sense of joy, that the sexual act may be joyous and beautiful. Why is it in America everything is so tragic about sex? It's either ridiculous or it's tragic. Well, it's not true. Very often a sexual act has a sense of humor to it. It's funny sometimes, and it's amusing sometimes, and it's beautiful sometimes. And that's what we were going to try to do. And Diane Keaton had to be the one to do it. And I knew it was going to take time. Not only is the set closed normally, but this area had to be closed even to most of the crew. So there was a cameraman and myself, sometimes an operator. We didn't even allow, there were no still people allowed, there were no press people allowed, ever, anyway. And as far as a script supervisor was concerned, we had to tell him afterwards what happened because she couldn't do it otherwise. So that was one problem. Another problem was working with deaf children. We put that off to last because these are really deaf children and that she teaches. She teaches in the school for the deaf. Well, how do I know how deaf children are going to react? Or whether they can play a scene, they're not actors. So we knew that that was a problem. Fortunately, the studio was very good in this respect, and I don't like to really say nice things about studios, but they stayed away from me. They let me alone. They didn't bother me. They didn't see the dailies. They didn't bother with the script. They didn't bother me, and they have been quite honorable and decent about our contract, which was let me alone. And they did. And we finished the picture, and they let me alone. And that was also a problem of whether or not they were going to let me alone. Eventually they had to see it. Well, eventually they had a right to see it. So I had to show it to them eventually, which was painful. I mean, painful for me to do that. But turned out to be pretty good.
I would say, generally speaking, the relationship with the actor is the most important. Once the material idea, the story, the screenplay is out of the way. Because working with the actor to create in little sections, out of continuity, without the full range to give a total performance in each scene, takes a good deal of understanding and sympathy. The actor sometimes, the actors for whom, with me, the spoken word, the need, the necessity to depend upon the actor has been very great, inordinately great. Therefore, my simpatico for the actor is very great. I have, for a man like Oscar Werner, reversed an entire set, redressed it because he wanted to play it to the right instead of the left.
In the Ship of Fools.
That's right,
Yeah.
because my respect for him is so great. I think for Spencer Tracy, I would have switched studios.
Yeah.
I would have done anything.
Yeah.
Because they had the electricity at the end of the wand or through their silver tones, sometimes pear-shaped, but through their silver tones, they've said what I wanted to say. Very importantly, no one could say things as Tracy said of them. He looked for God too high up and too far away, or this is what we believe in truth, justice, and the value of a single human being. Now, the actor and his relationship to me is very important, therefore. And I feel that though he has been responsible for my greatest agony, certain actors have given me more nights of sleeplessness than any other people or group of people in the world. But I'm dependent upon them. I must love them. I love them for what they can be and must be, rather than in each instance for what they are. But that's my opinion.